Hello and welcome to our Unenlightenment podcast. My name is Eric English. I'm your resident philosopher, theologian, and ninja. Hey, another great show for you today. We have with us Miss Matthew Distefano. Matt is a best-selling author and podcaster. He is the author of the book Heretic and a contributor to the new book Before You Lose Your Mind, Deconstructing Bad Theology in the Church. Matt is also a columnist and fellow troublemaker on Patheos Progressive Christian. He is a co-host of the Heretic Happy Hour podcast, and he is with us here today. Welcome, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love your setup there. You got the candles and everything, guitar in the background. It's looking nice, man.
Thanks. So, hey, before we get started and I start drilling you with a whole bunch of questions here, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you find yourself in progressive Christianity? What happened?
Well, I don't even know if I am that. I guess that's the moniker I fall into for Patheos because they have their different channels. I mean, I grew up evangelical and I was a questioner. So I think any questioner who is evangelical, I'm not going to say they all walk away from evangelicalism, but they'll probably walk away from the type of evangelicalism that we're talking about, like a very rigid fundamentalist. You have to affirm all these certain doctrines. And I apologize if my dog is squeaking in the background. We got a new puppy here, which is really testing my Buddhist practice. But when you're a questioner, when you challenge things, when you challenge LGBTQ or hell or inerrancy, you tend to find yourself in a different camp as time goes, whether that's agnosticism or atheism or some sort of new age mysticism or progressive Christianity. People tend to fall in different areas. And I don't know if I like the label progressive Christian because I don't know if I always am progressive politically, and sometimes the two can be conflated. Although I am fairly liberal when it comes to a lot of issues. But I mean, I think when you challenge the status quo of whatever that status quo is, you tend to break away from it. And so it's been a long, windy journey, and it's been exciting, though a bit daunting at times.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. Then to say you are controversial might be an inaccuracy. Maybe I was thinking about this earlier today. Maybe a shock jock. Matt, are you the shock jock of Christianity?
I hope not. I don't even know what does that mean?
Shock jock is just someone who is always shocking his audience with new things.
No, I mean, I think first, sorry, I got something in my eye. I think like shock jock it's like being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm just asking, like, I try to ask tough questions, and I'm not trying to be clickbaity or anything. I think people do need to be challenged. I'm iconoclastic, but I feel like shock jock is more shtick, and I try to be real and open and vulnerable about where I'm at and what I'm thinking.
Okay, sure. So I want to talk about something that is a little sensitive. Back in April, you on Patheos, you came out as being bisexual. I'm curious what the initial response you had from friends, family, other people who follow you.
It's a mixed bag. I mean, for the most part, like, people are understanding. People understand that sexuality is on a spectrum, and your sexuality doesn't have to do with who you're having sex with. So I've been married for like 17 years to a woman, happily married, not changing anything about that. Like, I just came out about something that is true to me, true for me, that I've always felt, although you put language to it later in life. You know what I mean? Like, you're always told these things are from Satan, or, this is a temptation and it's not really who you are. And then you realize, okay, that's kind of BS, and you realize who you are. But it doesn't change like your life in a like practical day-to-day level, except for the fact that you're being honest and open. So some people, they don't want to hear that. They just want to paint the narrative of what that means. Bisexual equals You're sleeping around. You're cheating on your wife. I've been accused of all these things from people, in our family, my wife's family, and they don't want to hear the fact that you could be happily married, monogamous, and be bisexual. Like, it breaks their brain. They don't want. They're like ostriches with their heads buried in the sand. They don't want to. They don't want to think that anything other than hetero is real. Like, it's so. But for the most part, the people that follow me, the people that read me, the haters and the trolls have kind of weeded themselves out through the years. I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years online, and writing for Patheos for like 3 or 4 years or something. And so the haters and the trolls kind of have gone away, or they get brushed away really quick, because I just don't have time for that. So the people that are around, like, they support me. People have had some questions, which is great. People have had stupid questions, like people I've never met with, like, hey, are you having sex with other men right now? And it's like, I've never met you, bro. Like, that's a weird first question. Like, I thought when people would find out, they would ask questions about the psychology of it, how's it been, like the question you just asked. But a lot of people were really curious about what I do with my penis, which I found that to be a really strange leading off question for a stranger. But overall, it's been supportive. Most people have been supportive. My parents have been supportive. My true friends have been. But there's been some hurt and harm, and led by fear and ignorance of what bisexual might mean. Mm-hmm. And instead of educating themselves, they've decided to double down on their ignorance, which is hurtful when it's family.
Yeah. How has the progressive crowd responded? Are they also a mixed bag, or?
Yeah, for the most part, it's cool, but there is like bi erasure. So it's like you get into this almost like you're not really bi, you're just kind of confused. The one I've seen most is like gay people will be like, oh, but you're still not victimized like I have been. And it's like, this isn't the victim Olympics. Like, you could find the most victim oppressed people. And that's like that. It's like we get into a kind of like a challenge on who's more victimized. It's like, I'm not here to do that. Like, I want gay people to walk down the street being gay, like holding hands, kissing each other, if that's what they're doing. It's not what I do in public, but if you want to do that, fine. I wish society was such where we could have that and it's normal and people don't go, ugh. But me coming out bi is not to like undermine the struggle that people before me have gone through. It's simply to say there's another voice out there who is saying, let's continue to be done with heteronormative as like the ideal. And that's all I'm doing. So there's been a few people like that. And it's like, well, you should have been around when I was coming out gay. And it's like, well, we could play that game all day long. But what's the point? Like, how about we just stand in solidarity and say, yeah, I wish it wasn't like that. I'm sorry it was like that. That's crappy,
Well, and it kind of assumes that you came out just to be a victim.
Right. And I'm not a victim of anything, man.
Right.
At the end of the day, like, yeah, there are people that are victimized 100%, like Black folks, gay folks, women throughout, history. But it doesn't mean that you still can't try to do something about it. You still have to live your life. Like, even if you're victimized, like, yes, we as a society can do better. Yes, we need to change the systems that oppress people. But sometimes the world just doesn't care about being about victims. And so, it sounds harsh, but sometimes you do have to like move through that. What other choice is there? And that's not to diminish anyone's pain or victimization at all. I'm just saying, like, sometimes the world doesn't care.
So I'm part of the RCA denomination, the Reformed Church in America, and they're heavily struggling with this right now as they have a lot of their churches in the West and the East part of the country who are more accepting, and then churches in the Midwest and South and stuff that are not as accepting. And so they're struggling with their own identity, trying to figure out how they can be a church that doesn't harm people, but at the same time is what they believe is faithful to the gospel and stuff like that. Do you think that it's even possible for the church, unless they are completely like they don't view it as a sin or anything like that, unless they're all in, do you think that the church is going to be able to positively handle this situation with homosexualities in the church?
I think I mean, like, let me make sure I clear about your question.
Sure.
Are you asking like that? Can you be non-affirming and still supportive and loving? Is that what you're kind of
Yes.
asking?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to a degree, maybe it's all on a spectrum. I mean, not everyone who is non-affirming is the Westboro Baptist Church.
Right.
But I think to fully embrace people is to affirm them. So I think there's always a bad way, like a better way, and the best way. And I'd say affirming is the best way. It affirms people for who they are. It would almost be like, oh, can the church be non-affirming of heterosexuality, and heterosexual people would be like, well, I would want to be affirmed wholly, not just kind of like tolerated.
Right.
So I think if the church is just tolerating something, it's not being as loving as it could be. So it's better than picketing funerals and making signs and standing on the street corner, or doing what someone has done to the Heretic Happy Hour, which is leave 52 voicemails in the matter of a week. It's not that, because that's like, yo, calm down. But it's not the best. It's not the best like situation for folks who aren't hetero.
Sure. I'm gonna switch it just a little bit here, a little tangentially. So abortion and homosexuality seem to be the big thing that makes people angry the most. I mean, put people into a rage. Why do you think that is? What is it about sex or sexuality that really, what do you think really sets people off?
I mean, if you, let's take the abortion issue for a second. If you really believe you're murdering babies, I can see why that would put you into a rage. Like, I don't see it that way, but if that's what you see, I understand being angry about like killing babies. Like, that would be horrible, right? So, but with sex in general, I honestly, like, sometimes I say, I have no idea why this is such an issue. Like, there's literally 6 or 7 verses that anachronistically can be used to, the so-called clobber passages, but it's like such a small emphasis in the Bible. Like, there's so much more emphasis on loving other people and welcoming in the foreigner or the stranger. There's a lot of verses about that, and compassion and empathy, but there's hardly any verses about what people do with their penis. I'm not reducing LGBT to that, but you know what I mean. I think honestly, like, a lot of it has to do with, I mean, I could play the Gerard route and say that the LGBT community looks like us, the heteronormative people, but they're a little bit different. So they are an easy scapegoat, and societies need a scapegoat in order to function, it's like the pressure release valve of a pressure cooker. If it doesn't have one, the society blows up and implodes upon itself. And societies need an easy other that isn't completely other, that can be kind of like us, but a little bit different, so that we can blame all of our ills on. And the LGBTQ community fits that easily. That's why they get blamed, or we get blamed, I guess, for tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that, which is ridiculous. So I think there's a part of that. I think there's also a part of not knowing our own true sexual selves. And I think there's a lot of people with maybe some repressed homoerotic feelings that are then projecting and lashing out at the people who are out and proud and not shamed, not feeling shame for who they are. And then they lash out and demonize them, but really it's internal projection of their own fears about maybe their own sexuality. I think there's a lot of that going on. I wouldn't say that's entirely the case, but you find all these people who are like the loudest anti-gay people out there. Oh, they get caught with X, Y, and Z. It's like, thou dost protest too much,
Yeah, and I think some of that also can be seen in the sex scandals that have just been plaguing the church recently, and like a lot of that. I think that there is definitely repressive nature to the church when it comes to sexuality.
Totally.
And that probably has a lot to do with it.
Well, and it also attacks their entire purity culture.
Right.
And so the purity culture is based on gender norms and sexual norms. And a challenge to that is a challenge to the status quo that they've become comfortable with, and they've probably profited and benefited off of.
Yeah.
So typically those in charge, those on the highest rung of society, which would typically be like white, straight men, any challenge to that, they see as like an attack to their way of life. So, if that's why a lot of people, they don't like the challenge from Black Lives Matter. They don't like the challenge from LGBT and Pride Month. Oh, what about straight Pride Month? You get people like that. It's like, that's been every month for all of history. Like, calm the hell down. It's like the kids who get upset that there's Mother and Father's Day. It's like, yo, I mean, you're a kid. Like, every day is Kids Day except for one day. Calm down.
Yeah, I have 3 kids.
You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine if certain people get a month or a couple days here.
Yeah. And really, I mean, it's not to celebrate oftentimes as much as it is to educate people. So,
well, and part of it is a celebration too. It's like celebrating the fact that you don't feel ashamed any longer. It's like, it's like there's been so much stigma and shame poured onto certain communities, especially gender and sexual minority groups, that it's like, it's like a celebration of who you are because you're no longer ashamed anymore. And also, like you said, to educate, like I've had to tell people that bisexual and monogamy are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to have sex with a bunch of people to be bisexual. Just like you knew you were straight before you could be a straight virgin, right? Just like you can be a monogamous bisexual person. And I know that breaks the brains of some people, but that's okay.
Yeah, life the two things are completely different.
Yeah.
About your book, Heretic. I think that it is a good book. I think that it falls into the category of one of those books I wish I had written. So congratulations. And I think it nicely summarizes the debates that often occur between evangelicals and people who are more progressive in nature. And so tell me, why did you write that book? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, I mean, I try to, I'm not sure what you try to do on Patheos or what you try to do, but for me, like, I read like really dense books I don't read them as much as I used to, but historically I've been reading, like 1,200 page books by Doug Campbell and J. Louis Martin, and these really dense scholarly books that I would never dream of writing, nor would I want to, nor could I. But I think what is found in some of those really scholarly books is a lot of nuggets of truth. How do we then distill it to the person who's not gonna, like my wife, she's really smart. She's an RN. She's been an RN for a long time, really educated. She's just not interested in the deep, scholarly theological things. So how do I communicate what I think is important to people who aren't going to read those books? So that's what I've taken on. In addition to the fact that I get asked a lot of questions, like you probably do, over and over and over. And instead of wanting to just answer them all the time, it's like, okay, let me put forth a succinct answer that still has a lot of information there. So the question of LGBTQ, I've got a chapter on that. The question of hell or free will or the quote unquote end times. I have like a chapter on each of these. So it's 10 of evangelicals' common questions that I get asked either on Patheos or on the hotline of the Heretic Happy Hour, things like that. And I hope I did a decent job answering them, but there's an extensive bibliography if you want to go deeper. So it's one of those things where it's like, this is introductory material for people who are sincerely asking questions. And then there's the opportunity to dig deeper outside of my book. So it's kind of like it's like a gateway drug from hardcore evangelicalism to good scholarly stuff.
Well, that's great. But one of the, if you were to, I just see a lot of either comments or things I've read in some of your books, some of the articles that I've looked at. there is this theme of universalism that runs through a lot of your stuff.
Sure.
How did you become a universalist? And maybe explain to us what you mean by that.
Well, even that has changed for me over the years. So my first book, All Set Free, was published by Wippenstock in 2015, was very heavily Christian universalist, patristic universalism. So the type of universalism argued by, early church fathers like Origen and Clement of Alexandria and even Gregory of Nyssa, a very Jesus-centered, Christocentric universalism where Christ reconciles the entire world. I don't know if I'm not there, and I don't know if I am there. So I do believe in a happy ending for all of humanity. How that works out, I'm pretty agnostic about. So I do think that there is intrinsic value, that all are made in the image and likeness of God, that all have the spark of the divine, whether Christian, Buddhist, Sikh, Muslim, agnostic, or otherwise. And I do think there is a happy ending and a reconciliation of all things that Paul talks about. But again, I don't know how it works out. I just believe that it does work out.
Okay.
And whether it's Christ-centered, whether it's the Christian universalist way, or whether it's something like the way of the Bodhisattva in Zen Buddhism, where the role of that who is the one who is the Bodhisattva is to put off their enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, for the enlightenment of all. And that at the end, you are kind of the last one to become enlightened by your own desire to aid those around you in becoming enlightened. So the telos of all of that is the enlightenment of all, the reconciliation of all. Again, I don't care how it plays out. I just hope in a happy ending. Call it a fairy tale. I don't care. Calvinists have accused me of believing in a fairy tale. I'd rather believe in a fairy tale than a tragedy.
So you incorporate a lot of Eastern and various religious, I don't want to say ideologies, but just perspectives.
Sure.
In your own faith.
Sure.
How does that work?
Very nicely.
Okay.
No, I mean, look, I think that each faith tradition, when you take a more mystical approach, when you take a more unitive approach, is all trying to say the same thing. And look, like Buddha came from his context, Jesus came from his context, Muhammad came from his context. But at the end of the day, I think they're all trying to kind of say the same thing. It's like we're all describing the moon from our vantage point. And it might look different to you in Michigan. It's going to look different to my friends in Ireland or in Europe. It's going to look different to the folks in Australia. But we all, when we point at it, we all say, oh, yeah, I recognize that. Looks different for me, but I recognize it. That's what I see the mystical tradition within each faith tradition as trying to do. So the Sufi, the Mahayana Buddhist, the Christian mystic like Richard Rohr and Teresa of Avila and Brother Lawrence. I think those folks could get together and have conversations and kind of nod their head and go, oh, I disagree with this, I agree with this. More so, and they're more in line with what they're saying than the mystic, the progressive Christian with the Westboro Baptist guy. Mm-hmm. And there's more in common with the first group than the second group, even though the second group are all Christians, quote unquote Christians. And so I see truth as kind of transcending all faith traditions, though I see that each faith tradition has truth. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the tension. I think you can practice Buddhism and you could be a Christian, just like you can practice yoga and be a Christian. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. Just like bisexual and monogamous aren't. We try to fall into these binary camps of it's either this or that. It's either black or white. It's up or down. It's left or right. And those are fine for certain things. If you're telling me directions to your house, that's fine. We can live in that binary world. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, I think we have to become, to quote my friend Michelle Collins, we have to go into the gray.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think that there's definitely a place in the church for in the realms of discipleship and different things like that to embrace some of these different cultural, because a lot of these are cultural too.
Totally.
and these practices that have been held for thousands of years, sometimes even longer than our own. And so, yeah, I think that the church can learn a lot from that.
Absolutely. And it's all about compassion and love and empathy. And you can be a Christian, you can not be a Christian. You can be a Jew, you can not be a Jew. What's really important is how you treat your neighbor. What's really important is how you treat others around you. We can bicker about doctrines and all that kind of stuff, but that shouldn't be primary. I think what's primary and what's taught by the great leaders of each faith tradition is, how do you treat others? Are you merciful? Are you compassionate? Do you care about the poor? Do you care about the oppressed?
Mm-hmm. What makes you reside more in Christianity than, and I'm making an assumption here, but what makes you reside more in Christianity than it does any of the other beliefs?
I don't know if I do, but if I did, I would say it's simply because of my context. Most people in America, well, I mean, the numbers are fading as the polls suggest. Mm-hmm. But my context is Christianity. My background is Christianity. The people I grew up with were evangelical. I'm speaking to that first and foremost. I know a lot more Christians than I do Buddhists or Muslims. I think what I'm speaking about transcends Christianity, but for the most part, the people I'm talking to are either Christian or post-Christian, but they come from that context. So if I was in the Middle East, I in the Arab world, I might be speaking about these things from a Muslim perspective. If I was in India, Tibet, in the East, I might be speaking from a Hindu or a Buddhist context, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't know if I personally look on the day to day, unless you're asking me these questions, I don't think about it.
Yeah.
Like I just don't. I try to be mindful. I try to be present, and whatever that is like the labels we use are fine. But it's like carrying your canoe across the river. When you get to the other side, you no longer need to carry it.
So, hey, Matt, thanks for joining us today. Everybody go out there and pick up his book, Heretic, and the new book, Before You Lose Your Mind, Destructing Bad Theology in the Church, is also a really good book. We talked about that in our last podcast with Keith Giles. And so just thanks for joining us and having a conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I will say, I hope everyone does pick up Before You Lose Your Mind. We kind of wrote it as Keith may have said this as a response to the Gospel Coalition's Before You Lose Your Faith. And so it's kind of that, but it's also like, I just think we're trying to we don't have an agenda. I don't know what everyone believes in that book, and it doesn't matter to me because the journey is important. So I might be way different than Keith on a lot of things, and we're way different than Derek, who's another host of the Heretic Happy Hour, and his but all of our perspectives are going to be different, but we all cherish the perspective and say, hey, this journey is important to go through, no matter what your conclusion is on the other side, because that conclusion is honestly going to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an excellent book. Definitely go out there and check it out. Thanks again, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.